Hello and welcome to Fostering Freedom. I'm Orange. I'm just gonna say Orange now. And this is episode 5, I think, of the podcast. And today, what I want to talk about is inflation and understanding inflation and all its types and the ways in which it sort of manifests. Of course, it goes without saying that I'm not going to be able to cover all the types, but I hope to give enough clues about how inflation functions with some of the examples that you can connect the dots and you know put anything that you see around around yourself in the context of inflation. I mean, if there's some sort of a normal, non-fundamental sort of behavior, let's say, you can sort of understand it in the context of inflation then. So yeah, let's begin. And first, I want to begin with the definition of what inflation is. I mean, of course, this video is not going to be like an economics class or anything like that. I'm just going to talk and you know make make my points in sort of a layman way. But what inflation is an expansion of the money supply, and that's as simple as it gets. Now, the result of this expansion of the money supply, among other factors, is what leads to increase in prices, right? Inflation itself is not the prices that are inflated. In fact, so much so that the deflation doesn't come about until inflation does. So before all of this nonsense, it was understood that prices generally go down, right? So there was no, I don't think there is any particular term for a tendency of the prices to go down or anything because it was just the normal market state. At least that's what I speculate, right? Someone can correct me if they are informed about this. But deflation, as opposed to inflation, would be a contraction of the money supply. It's not prices going down, even though generally that's how it's defined as. That is deleveraging, which leads to a lot of prices going down, and especially when bubbles crash, when there's an asset deflation, as they call it, happen. Well, what's happening there is not deflation; it is actually a deleveraging that's happening because all these assets, they're not, they're not backed by any kind of real money, so to speak. They're leveraged to the hill, right? So there you see when the market crashes, all these overvaluations and whatnot, the deleveraging of that market happening. And of course, that is defined, so to speak, as a crash, right? Once we have inflation out of the way, there's mainly, or to my knowledge, only two main types in which, or main ways in which it manifests that are most visible and ill defined by the people. So, what people usually understand about inflation is that, oh, prices are going to rise, right? Prices are going to rise, and, this is what happens with inflation, yada, yada, yada. Well, even according to the official government numbers, the US dollar has lost 96% of its purchasing power. Yet, to the same effect, prices haven't gone up. And the reason for it is, of course, first of all, you have market deflation, which is as time goes on, competition and whatnot, all these sorts of things lead to the prices always going down. There is a video I'm going to link to, which is on my other channel, that is a more personal random channel, and that explains why prices always go down. There's never any sort of upward tendency for prices. And in real terms, you can say that yes, prices are always going down, but when you count for inflation in nominal terms, prices seem to be, generally always going up, except for when deflation sort of takes place, right? Market deflation, as some people say. I don't call it deflation per se, but I don't have any other word for it. So when I say deflation here, I simply mean prices going down. I don't mean a contraction of the money supply. But that would be the correct definition if you believe that the real definition of inflation is an increase in the money supply, right? And yeah, so deflation is natural in the market. Like, for example, the best way in recent times you can look at it is, previously people would give the examples of cars and all these sorts of things. But now I guess the biggest, you know, way in which you can observe this is in computer memory, right? Over the last, God knows, 30 years, how far has computer memory come from, right? And the prices have maybe remained the same or have gone down, but the storage space is so much more, right? I mean, used to be like 64, 32 megabytes worth of disks or floppies would cost the same amount as probably a 64 gigabyte um, you know memory card costs today, or a pen drive or what have you. I mean, I just bought a pen drive for $3.50, or maybe it was actually it's $8.50, and it is 64 gigabytes. I mean, yeah, I think it's 64. It may be even 128, but that's a lot of storage, and it's by SanDisk itself, right? So that's a lot of storage that you wouldn't get for this price point back then, right? So that's one way in which the market outpaces it. And of course, there's a lot of productive processes and whatnot. But another way in which the market escapes sort of inflation or puts up a guard over inflation so that people don't notice it in order to stay competitive over everybody else is shrinkflation, right? So what shrinkflation is, I think the term comes from Cadbury or chocolate manufacturers, where inflation was happening, yet the prices weren't going down for chocolate. So a bunch of these guys, which should have been obvious, I don't know why they did a study or whatever for it, noticed that the sizes of the chocolate are going down, right? So over 10 years they were chipping away a small amount of chocolate. At least that's what I'm aware, that was a study. So I don't know if it's just a normal term that came about, but they saw that the chocolate sizes were shrinking just a little bit so that you don't notice it, and the prices stayed the same, right? So that's how they cope from inflation. Another way they can cope from inflation is that the packaging stays the same, but the quantity inside gets shrunk. So these are the examples that I'm giving, but know that there's unlimited ways in this happens in the market. Realistically, we cannot count all of them. Is biscuits, right? And biscuits are one of my favorites when it comes to explaining shrinkflation, because it's something that I've had experience extensively firsthand with with coping with shrinkflation and how it functions. It's so the pack size remains the same. I mean, you can see this with chips as well, but the amount of chips or amount of biscuits inside is by weight shrunk. Now, the way they do this is they take a plastic casing and put that around the biscuits, right? Or another packaging that is a little bit thicker than the outside, and put that around the biscuits. So, biscuits are cookies for other people that understand it differently. But there's a little tray in which they sit on, and the biscuits themselves get smaller, and the tray, kind of it holds the biscuits together. That gets bigger and bigger. Another way is with a biscuit example, that how brands cope with increasing costs in order to stay competitive is the packaging quality reduces. So with biscuits, again, I told you about the tray in which they sit on. Now the purpose of the tray is that it makes space between biscuits, right? So one more thing is that you can increase the space in between biscuits while having lesser biscuits. And you can cope with inflation that way. But anyway, this is a different example. This is that, okay, there used to be a tray, and that tray serves a purpose, right? That with that space, if you have pressure on one side, only one biscuit is going to break. It's not going to be, all the biscuits, like a domino effect, aren't going to break. So when you open the package, it's a little bit of better experience for you. You get a lot more for your money. But recently, I've seen like the prices remain the same, but they remove the tray, right? So of course, the quality of the biscuits inside is going to go down because there's going to be a lot of powder from the breakage. Maybe they'll get crushed or whatever. And in order to avoid this, most of the brands, they wouldn't even have a tray, right? So they're going to cut costs there. Another way is that they're gonna introduce a different kind of packaging inside, right? Where what is it? It's like a silver lining, and that's vacuum sealed, sort of, on the biscuits, right? So the purpose is to, with a little bit of a gap in between the biscuits. So the purpose is to kind of achieve the same thing as a plastic tray, but be a lot cheaper, from my understanding. But it doesn't work that well, and I've seen less and less brands use it. They just put the biscuits directly in there. So the biscuit category is one of the best examples of shrinkflation that I've ever seen, personally. Another way is, when it comes to metal products and products that deal with metals, is alloys, right? Alloys are a great way to make cheaper and cheaper, material and have the same price. So you're going to see lots of different kinds of alloys change in percentages, and where they're used on the product in the same way. One of the best ways you can see it is in locks, right? Locks have not changed their prices that much, as compared to the rest of the products. Now, the reason is that a lot of locks use zinc alloys and whatnot in their casing, in their body, maybe in the core they're using some real metals. But of course, if the casing falls apart, the entire lock is kind of useless at that point. So that's one of the examples. Now, let's move on to skewflation. And I'm kind of hurrying it up here because I want to explain the consequences of all these sorts of inflation. And I hope to cover a lot so you can, see where all this leads to. But yeah. So skewflation is when only certain assets get inflated and the money stays kind of locked in that pool. This is what is happening in any sort of bubble, that is an asset bubble, right? So generally, other economists and classicals, I believe, or even Keynesians would agree perhaps that inflation is a general rise in prices, right? Now, of course, that inflation is not, and I'll come to the velocity part of it later, which is completely a moot point in my opinion. I mean, this is just ridiculous. That point they make about velocity being this and that. I mean, it's asinine. And yeah, so they agree that inflation is a general rise in prices. But what happens when you don't have a general rise in prices? Where's the inflation going then, right? So it is manifesting in different assets where the money increase is landing up in, usually, and those assets are, of course, equity, stocks, and all these sorts of things that are of sort of appreciating luxury consumption, or appreciating assets, as others put it. Most, notably, these are houses, real estate. These are also, what do you call it? Stocks, as I mentioned. So what usually happens is, due to the central bank actions and bank actions, the interest rates become very, very cheap. So lending is actually, they lend quite easily, right? So because of these lending practices, a lot of trade happens on leverage, and these loaned up, sort of debted, um, purchases increase over time because of the low interest rate policies, and the money ends up in stocks and all these sorts of places, right? So think about the real estate market, because taking a mortgage is so easy. If you can get a 30-year at less than what the real inflation rate is, while your money grows, let's say you are diversified. And I mean, this is where it becomes the play of multimillionaires and all these sorts of people. Is okay, if you have like $20 million, you can easily play this game of playing, getting 30-year mortgages, knowing that the inflation is going to rise in real terms more, while you have your other money tied up in assets that are also going to outpace inflation. So you're, over time, earning a lot more than, you're going to have to pay for, and to pay for that house will become cheaper and cheaper as time goes on for you, right? So with this action, you can just see how a small amount of the population gets richer and richer, and as they do, the sort of inflation also increases in these areas, right? So the prices also jump up. I mean, you can look at the stock market, for example. I mean, it has gone up perpetually. The reason why it is going up perpetually is because there haven't been any crashes, as weird as it may seem. I mean, there haven't. All these crashes in the past, they've all been rolled over into, a crash that will happen on a later date. And the problem with, you know, low interest rate lending and all these sorts of things have only increased over time, right? So the 2008 bubble is the best example of all these crashes being rolled over, right? When you had this bailout, right? These bailouts, pretty much what they did was they saved the real crash from happening. Had they not bailed them out, perhaps, the market would normalize. And of course, that would require the Fed to completely stop printing any money, so to speak, and giving it out to banks and removing fractional reserve and all these sorts of things that promote this kind of behavior. So that is inflation, right? And where the term comes from, as far as I know of the origin, it is coming from, India. Because we had this skewflation in the 90s or maybe early 2000s, where we knew that, okay, a lot of assets are skewed. I mean, India has never recovered from skewflation. It has been in the skewflation since its very independence. So that's where someone came up with the term, and it's an excellent term because it describes how the economy is skewed completely towards these high net worth individuals when compared to the rest of the population. So there is no general population, and of course everybody else has to foot the bill who is not in this appreciating money class. Now, what I wanted to expand on further now is the consequences. But before I move on to the consequences, I don't want to make this too long. So before I move on to the consequences, I want to address velocity. Now, velocity is pretty much, they have this formula, right? I mean, I forgot the exact thing, but they stress on, money velocity should also have to be higher in order for inflation to reach this. Well, of course, there's going to be always a money velocity. I mean, yeah, you can't stop surviving. You can't just stop interacting with the entire universe. People are not gonna, just take the money and not spend it when it's depreciating. So the velocity increases because of the depreciation. When the velocity starts to go down, despite the depreciation in the currency, you're going to see a stagflationary situation happen. You're going to see, what else are you going to see? You're going to see confidence in the currency completely erode, right? So that is one of the things, one of the, or one of the few things that happen, right? When you have a sort of velocity lessening, which is the amount of people, the amount of hands that are exchanged in any economy. But that is a completely moot point, in my opinion, because when you have money that is depreciating quicker and quicker, you're going to see velocity automatically. It's kind of a self-feeding cycle because people cannot stop their consumption. And of course, if you have a lot of money, excess supply of money going to consume, or you're going to invest it in things that grow that supply of money, or acquire a lot of things that grow that supply of money, or that amount of money. And those are things that will get skewflated then. So if you're not going to see inflation in the consumer prices, which a lot of Keynesians would focus on generally, you're seeing it in other areas which you're completely ignoring. So this point of velocity being this and that, I mean, the general consumer has no idea how to properly save money, but the elite class who have their asset management funds and whatnot, they know exactly how to safeguard against all of this. So those are going to save their money elsewhere where it grows, right, where it gives them a higher return. So the point is completely nonsense when you look at inflation as the bigger picture. Now, the consequence of inflation, and what are the main consequences of inflation, is an increase in crime. Now, a lot of people will say, well, there's cultural factors, social factors, this and that. Well, understand that yes, those are true, but at the same time, in inflation, when you see that okay, your money is not holding any value, it doesn't have any kind of purchasing power. What are you going to do? You're going to not snatch the money. You're going to snatch things that are useful, right? That are going to be sold or traded in the black market for something else. Let's say it would be, maybe early on it will be Bitcoin or whatever. It can't, I don't see it, but it can be gold, of course. That has traditionally been what it has been. So a lot of things that are of value get stolen. And what are the phenomena that I've observed, and it's completely personally subjective, anecdotal, but I believe it is true personally. So I'm just gonna say it out: is a lot of people wearing a lot less jewelry, right, and flaunting a lot less wealth. That increases over time, right? So the old money that in any shape, they don't flaunt it that much. But to the extent that they do, that has been reduced. You're seeing a lot of these, tech billionaire sort of bandies. They're posing as if they have a lot less money. That's kind of a fear-driven. Um, what do you call it when you get fear scared, and you, for that reason you're changing your views, something like that. So they're dressing in plain clothes and going outside because of course they can't really show anything because it's going to make them a glowing target. And then inflation, when your money is losing value, working for money really is a lot less comfortable than just stealing someone's watch and having it sold every once every month. And of course that watch is in an inflationary environment appreciating in value, right? So crime increases a lot. You have a lot less material wealth that is shown, right? Especially in general circles. So the normal population, the middle class, is going to contract in the amount of wealth that they decide to show outward. So they're gonna not wear as many fancy clothes. They're not gonna wear that much jewelry. They're gonna reduce or maybe just consume different lower order, well, not lower order, but what do you call it? Not luxury cars, but less than that, right? So they're gonna go for cheaper cars, let's say cheaper products that are not as flaunty in the way they look, right? And those are what are the consequences. The other consequence is that any kind of fundamental thinking that you have, that okay, nothing goes up forever, and of course that in the long term stands true, but in the short term and in the term that for the time being that money is being created, all that can be turned upside down. So the entire financial, anything that has to do with money, goes completely haywire in an everything bubble, right? So you'd say that, oh, this doesn't have any value. Who's gonna buy this? Some kind of modern art junk. And of course, in an everything bubble, there's so much money sloshing around in the system that somebody's gonna buy, and you're gonna be like, "Look, I proved them wrong. I proved my haters wrong." And also, you have this. Sorry for banging on my mic so much. Um, you have this sort of situation where unprofitable businesses are doing good. So what that leads up to is, okay, you're gonna go to someone with a business idea, and they're gonna say, well, how's that gonna work? We already have this, or this is just nothing new. Everybody can do this. So how are you gonna make a lot of money? You're asking for so much money against this. Let's look at the startup industry, for example, and in an everything bubble, you're gonna see that all these unprofitable otherwise businesses will become sort of lead to riches to the founders that exit, right? So the stock can keep going up and up, and of course at that time, the founders will exit, all the original investors will exit, someone will acquire them, and then you're going to be like, look, I mean, people told me it's going to be unprofitable, it's not going to work. Well, look, it worked, right? So that's where it gets turned sort of upside down. And another consequence of inflation is because of shrinkflation and competitive pressures in the market. a lot of focus diverts from um, sort of making better products or newer products, and instead coping with inflation itself. So a lot of investment that otherwise would have gone in developing newer products, better products, leading to more innovation, it now goes into coping with inflation, right? So, of course, you have a lot of things at play here. So one can't really put a finger at where this is happening exactly. But we know, let's say, that a lot of industry focus goes on discovering different alloys that work together and making cheaper products, making industrial production a lot cheaper, and that kind of comes from coping with inflation rather than general just market competitive pressures. Because now, okay, let's say that a society or something agrees on the lowest quality of a product that they're going to buy, right? Someone's going to come in an inflationary environment, people are going to be like, okay, they're going to throw that out of the window. So the time preference rises as inflation increases, right? So you want things now because things don't work in the future. And of course, newer and newer things keep on coming into the scene. So you're willing to compromise on the quality of the products a lot, right? So people can make cheaper and cheaper products and sort of, make do with that instead of making things a lot more heavier in nature in terms of quality. Now, since I have some more time and I try to aim for 30 to 45 minutes, I don't think I'll go for 45 minutes on just inflation alone, but I'll focus on stagflation. So, what stagflation is really just, inflation manifesting in another way, and it's when the innovation gets stagnated. As I said earlier, that all the innovation goes into coping with inflation. Well, that's really what happens. The market completely stagnates, and because of the highly where the wealth is highly concentrated, that's where you're going to see most of the innovation going to come from, right? Most of the innovation coming from. So, for example, in the case of Japan, let's say the giant technology companies that have still got appreciating assets and all these sorts of things, you'll see most of the innovation going to come from there and nowhere else. Every other industry is pretty much going to be sticking with coping with inflation as time goes on. Of course, there's a boiling point to it where sort of everybody has to raise the prices. So that's when you see the raise of price in the market. So until they can get away with not raising the prices, they will not raise the prices, and they'll do anything to stay competitive in the market, right? So of course, if you have a visible trade-off in quality, you're going to go for the quality product. But with inflation, what really happens is over time, because you're becoming poorer and poorer, you won't see the quality product, right? You will have to compromise with the product that is of a shittier quality but just cheaper so you can utilize it right now, right? And that is, of course, another thing that contributes to the rise in time preferences, right? You want things for the now because saving is useless. Saving becomes entirely useless as things don't last longer, right? Money doesn't last any longer, and money is really the real indicator of where everything else goes as well. So if you have money that is not lasting, that is completely useless, you're going to see all the things that are traded in this particular money being of the same nature. So Chinese products, for example, are in one way a consequence of this inflation, but they're more of a consequence of United States becoming incompetent and their policies regarding their money and all these sorts of things. So it's one of the things. I mean, if you can't get away with cheaper products, why not just do that? And yeah, that's where the focus ends up being. So I think I've covered everything. I didn't cover stagflation as much because it is there's not too much to stagflation, right? That stagflation is just inflation and all its consequences, observed at one time, right? So inflation is happening, money is losing its value, innovation has completely dried, has gone to a halt. So people are saving a lot more, but then they are losing money on their savings. So innovation is halted because savings doesn't render any kind of good business or whatever. So that's what you see really. I mean, in a stagflation. So there's not much there yet. In the media, surprisingly, not much attention is given to shrinkflation or skewflation, things that are happening, but a lot attention is given to stagflation, right? What we have in Japan. Oh, look, it's such a big problem and all this sort of thing. Well, it is happening right now. What leads to stagflation is an extended inflation, right? So any country that embarks on the course of stagflation until it loses complete confidence in its currency, you're going to see an eventual stagflation there. And it is likely that if there is a stagflationary scenario in the U.S. Currency or U.S. dollar, maybe you're going to see the end of the era of stagflation and the beginning of currency confidence loss. And the only reason that currency confidence loss doesn't happen all that often is because of central banking. If you had a lot of banks, if you had a lot of private banks, you're going to see a lot more currency confidence, loss sort of happening with these private banks because there's places to run to directly, right? And you can trade in a lot of different currencies. So vendors are going to stop accepting things that buy them a lot less, right? Accepting currencies and whatnot, and that leads to a currency confidence crash. And you have alternative options in the market which you can buy now things with. With central banks, you don't really have anywhere to run, right? When you have legal tender and the financial markets completely tied to one currency, and you don't really have any other choice to go with anything, and regulation makes it impossible to go with anything else, you're not going to see, a currency confidence loss that quickly until there is also non-enforcement of legal tender and all these sorts of things. So that's why completely missed it. Stagflation exists, right? It is primarily a feature that has come about with central banking. If there wasn't any kind of central bank in existence, you wouldn't really see stagflation exist. Currency confidence will just go down. People will choose other banks, and this would happen very, very quickly. It wouldn't happen like for 30 years or 100 enduring years. The currency is completely lost 97% of its value, yet people are still going along with it. That's not going to happen in the free market with all these sorts of other banks. Where are you going to store money at? In a bank where every year your money buys less and less, or in a bank where every month or every year it buys more and more? The answer is pretty clear. And with central banks, that is not possible at all. So really, I think I've covered it. I think I've covered all the three types, the three main types. There might be another other subgroups of inflation there, but let me know if you guys want me to address them. Also, I really wanted to take time out to appreciate all the people that are listening, even though it is far and few in between. Like there's 3 people or 4 people, maybe 3 it is realistically, that have listened, apart from me, of course, to all my episodes, because I'm seeing the hours watched in total go up. So I really appreciate you guys watching. Even though it's a small number, it doesn't really matter that much. I will, or I'm thinking about, getting on all the sorts of Spotify and podcasting networks, but I'll see about that because it's like $250 a year. Now, it isn't that much, I would say, with podcast.co or whatever it is, but I still iffy on whether I should be spending that much money for something that I've just recently started doing. So I'll think about it. Perhaps when I'm on all those platforms, maybe we can increase the community. And yeah, see you guys later. Thanks for listening.